The flickering glow of a film projector has a strange way of altering reality. For nearly a century, the golden age of cinema and the dawn of television constructed an architectural marvel of illusion, a sanctuary where human beings were elevated into modern deities. Under the blinding brilliance of the studio spotlights, these figures possessed an otherworldly perfection, their faces carved from light and shadow, their voices carrying a velvet authority that could captivate millions across the globe. To the public, they were timeless, untouched by the common friction of everyday existence, existing only within a pristine frame of glamour and confidence. We watched them conquer galaxies with effortless swagger, embody the rugged frontiers of the Old West, and redefine international elegance with a single glance from beneath darkened eyelashes. They were the architects of our collective dreams, their names synonymous with a level of prestige that seemed destined to burn forever in the cultural sky. Yet, behind the heavy velvet curtains of the great studios and beyond the manicured lawns of Bel Air, a completely different story was quietly unfolding. The very spotlights that granted these legends immortality also functioned as a gilded cage, obscuring the heavy toll of an industry that demanded absolute perfection at any cost. For decades, the public saw only the dazzling smile, the impeccable tailored suit, and the radiant gown, completely unaware of the hidden fractures developing just beneath the surface. Fame at such a dizzying height is a fragile currency, and the transition from a celebrated idol to a forgotten face of the past is often accompanied by an unvoiced, lingering sorrow. As the studio system began to shift and the cultural tides turned, many of these iconic figures found themselves grappling with the sudden, quiet departure of the spotlight, trading the roar of the crowd for a more isolated, introspective existence. There is a profound, atmospheric melancholy in watching the years quietly accumulate around those who once symbolized youth, strength, and flawless beauty. Today, the remnants of that grand era live on in private sanctuaries, distant ranches, and quiet art studios, far removed from the chaotic energy of modern celebrity culture. Some have channeled their remaining years into reclusive creativity, using paintbrushes or private memoirs to process a lifetime of extraordinary highs and devastating lows. Others live almost entirely outside the public eye, their names whispered by film historians who recognize the immense, hidden drama that defined their true departures from the screen. The illusions of old Hollywood were meticulously guarded by contract agreements and powerful studio heads, but time is an entity that cannot be bought or negotiated. As we begin to peel back the layers of this magnificent fading tapestry, we catch our first glimpse of the real human beings who inhabited these cinematic myths, individuals who carried extraordinary secrets, enduring pain, and a quiet resilience as the cameras finally stopped rolling. To understand the immense weight of the crown these icons wore, one must journey back to the golden years, an era when the machinery of fame operated at its absolute peak. The path to the top was a meticulous alchemy of raw ambition, fortunate encounters, and the ruthless sculpting of personal identity. Young men and women arrived in California with nothing but their natural traits, only to be completely reinvented by studio executives who altered their names, their histories, and even the way they walked or spoke. This was the era where a rugged individualist could be transformed into a global symbol of masculinity with a simple squint of the eyes, and a graceful young woman could be elevated to international elegance through a single, carefully lit close-up. The screen became a mirror of idealized human perfection, and for a time, the illusion was flawless. Behind the scenes, however, the reality of this golden existence was defined by a grueling pace and an intense pressure to maintain the facade. The contract system bound actors to specific studios, turning their lives into property that was managed 24 hours a day. A rising star did not simply go home after the director called action. Their social circles, their romantic attachments, and their public statements were all dictated by publicity departments whose sole job was to preserve the investment. In this environment, true intimacy was a rare luxury, and behind the dazzling smiles captured by premier photographers lay a world of fierce competition and hidden anxiety. Every new role was a battle to maintain status, and the fear of a single box office failure or a whisper of scandal kept many of these legends in a state of perpetual vigilance. As the years rolled on into the late 20th century, the nature of stardom began to shift, bringing the first true difficulties to this elite circle. The old studio system collapsed, leaving actors to navigate a changing landscape without the protective shield of the executives who had created them. For some, this meant a transition into television, where rugged Western heroes found a second life defining American toughness on the small screen, or where sophisticated beauties broke cultural barriers by bringing unprecedented elegance to mainstream broadcasts. Yet, this new medium demanded a different kind of endurance, one that required performers to inhabit the same character for years on end, risking the permanent confinement of typecasting. The transition was rarely smooth, and behind the scenes, many fought quiet battles against the realization that their peak cinematic years were beginning to recede into history. It was during these transitional decades that the first visible fractures appeared in the perfect facade. The public began to catch glimpses of the emotional toll required to stay relevant in an industry that constantly demanded newer, younger faces. Behind closed doors, marriages dissolved under the strain of competing careers, and the isolation of fame led many to seek refuge in private worlds of art, literature, or secluded ranches far away from the flashing cameras. The contrast between the public image and the private reality grew increasingly stark. A leading man celebrated for his slick charisma and powerful presence might spend his evenings contemplating the fragile nature of his success, while a glamorous international beauty icon might struggle with the profound loneliness that often accompanies being objectified by millions of strangers. Moreover, the behind-the-scenes intrigues of this era involved a constant negotiation between personal conviction and professional survival. The industry was undergoing a creative revolution, with unconventional performers and psychological storytellers challenging the traditional boundaries of cinema. This environment created a unique tension between the established guardians of classic glamour and the raw, unpredictable talent that was reshaping the art form. To survive, the legends of the past had to adapt, often taking roles that subverted their previous images or highlighted their underlying vulnerabilities. This period saw some of the most intense, emotionally layered performances in history, as actors drew upon their own hidden pains and real-life anxieties to portray characters who were similarly fractured and struggling against the passage of time. Yet, even as these performers demonstrated extraordinary resilience, the industry continued its relentless march forward. The golden years were fading, replaced by a more cynical, fast-paced entertainment culture that left little room for the grand, theatrical style of the past. The first major difficulties often manifested as a sudden silence from the telephone, a scarcity of scripts that offered the depth these veterans deserved, and the realization that the cultural conversation was moving on without them. The glamour that had once seemed so solid and permanent began to feel like a distant memory, preserved only in the celluloid of classic films and the nostalgic recollections of a devoted but aging audience. It was a subtle, creeping shift, but it set the stage for the deep personal turnings and public awakenings that would soon redefine their lives entirely. When the midpoint of a legendary career is reached, the universe often demands a day of reckoning, a sharp turning point where the protected world of the studio lot collides violently with the raw realities of human existence. Behind the heavy oak doors of Hollywood mansions and within the executive suites of major networks, a profound silence was often maintained regarding the true crises that shook these cultural icons. Society and the studio apparatus possessed a powerful, unspoken agreement to keep the curtain drawn tightly over the deep personal dramas, sudden health emergencies, and devastating scandals that threatened to dismantle the very myth they had spent decades constructing. To acknowledge the frailty of a cinematic god was to admit that the magic itself was mortal, and so the industry guarded its dark secrets with a fierce, calculating desperation. For many of these celebrated figures, the true turning point arrived not in the form of a public scandal, but in a sudden, quiet confrontation with their own physical limitations and emotional boundaries. There were moments when the high-wire act of maintaining an unblemished public persona simply became too much to bear, leading to dramatic departures from the spotlight that left the public entirely in the dark. Infamous health crises were whispered about in industry circles, but carefully sanitized for the daily newspapers, transforming a near-fatal medical event or a sudden psychological collapse into a simple case of exhaustion or a planned vacation. Behind closed doors, iconic leading men and ethereal beauties were forced to look into the mirror and confront a reality that no amount of soft lighting or makeup could alter. The spotlight was moving, and their bodies and minds were paying the ultimate price for a lifetime spent in service of the lens. The silence of the studios was not merely a gesture of protection, it was a mechanism of control. When a groundbreaking performer or a controversial director pushed the boundaries of societal norms too far, or became entangled in deep legal and psychological quagmires, the industry's first instinct was to insulate itself. Complex personal lives, controversial relationships, and shocking behind-the-scenes betrayals were systematically buried under a mountain of non-disclosure agreements and carefully orchestrated press releases. The public was fed a steady diet of manufactured narratives, while the stars themselves were left to process their trauma, their grief, and their changing status in total isolation. This institutional silence created a profound sense of duality for the heroes of our screens, who had to walk onto a soundstage and project supreme confidence while their private worlds were fracturing into pieces. This era of hidden drama was also defined by a quiet resistance. As several icons refused to be entirely crushed by the machinery of the industry or the rigid expectations of the public. In the face of intense societal pressure and industry isolation, certain individuals chose to redirect their immense influence toward causes that extended far beyond the boundaries of cinema. They walked away from the traditional path of the Hollywood elite, stepping onto global stages to human rights, environmental preservation, and humanitarian relief, often facing immense backlash from the very establishment that had once celebrated them. This shift from a scripted character to a real-world force was the ultimate turning point, a declaration that their voices belonged to them, not to the executives who held their contracts. It was a dangerous, transformative choice that forever altered how history would view their legacies. Yet for those who chose a path of absolute privacy, the turning point was marked by a gradual, deliberate retreat into the shadows. The realization that an industry once built on loyalty had transitioned into a cynical, hyper-commercialized landscape led many veteran performers to simply close their doors to the world. They watched from afar as new generations of media completely altered the nature of fame, replacing the grand, mysterious allure of old Hollywood with a relentless, invasive form of celebrity culture. In this new world, the dignity and quiet sophistication that had defined their golden years seemed to have no place. By choosing silence, they preserved the sanctity of their memories and protected themselves from the predatory gaze of a society that consumed and discarded its idols with terrifying speed. The true tragedy of this hidden era lies in the immense burden carried by these performers, who were required to remain frozen in time for the benefit of their fans. To the world, they would always be the daring space pirate, the rugged Western lawman, the elegant international spy, or the radiant romantic lead. Society refused to allow them to age, to fail, or to change, demanding that they embody a permanent ideal of youth and perfection. Behind the closed doors of their private estates, these legends lived through the natural, painful transitions of life, the loss of lifelong companions, the decline of their health, and the fading of their cultural dominance, while the rest of the world continued to worship the unchanging images captured on film. This profound separation between the living human being and the eternal cinematic myth is the ultimate hidden drama of the Golden Age, a reality that reshaped the final chapters of their extraordinary lives. As the long shadows of the evening finally settle over the grand landscape of entertainment history, we are left to contemplate the profound and lasting impact of these extraordinary individuals who defined the 20th century. The final chapters of their lives reveal a deeply moving tapestry of quiet reflection, artistic reinvention, and a dignified acceptance of the passage of time. Far removed from the deafening roar of the premiere crowds and the intense pressure of studio executive demands, these legendary icons found ways to navigate their twilight years on their own terms, leaving behind a wealth of little-known biographical details and an indelible mark on human culture that no changing tide can ever wash away. Many of these celebrated figures chose to spend their final decades entirely reinventing the nature of their creativity. In the quiet sanctuaries of their private estates, away from the glare of the flashbulbs, former matinee idols and celebrated screen sirens traded the script for the paintbrush, the camera lens for the typewriter, or the chaotic energy of Hollywood for the serene isolation of expansive country ranches. These late-stage pursuits were not mere hobbies, but essential avenues for processing a lifetime of intense public observation and hidden personal drama. They authored deeply introspective memoirs that peeled back the layers of studio-manufactured myth, or created works of visual art that expressed the complex emotions they were never allowed to show on screen. In doing so, they proved that their brilliance was never dependent on a director's cue, but was a fundamental part of their human spirit. The biographical histories of these stars are filled with remarkable, often overlooked triumphs that occurred long after their names had slipped from the top of theatre marquees. Throughout their later years, several of these icons demonstrated a profound resilience, quietly overcoming severe health crises, personal tragedies, and the painful loss of their contemporaries with a grace that mirrored the strength of their most beloved characters. They returned to the stage in intimate theatrical productions, lent their instantly recognizable voices to historical documentaries, or spent decades mentoring the next generation of performers, passing down the sacred, unwritten laws of classic, dramatic interpretation. Their continued dedication to the arts, even in the face of physical decline, serves as a powerful reminder of why they captured the world's imagination in the first place. Beyond their artistic contributions, the enduring legacy of this magnificent generation is defined by the immense personal courage they displayed when stepping completely out of their comfort zones to alter the course of society. The world will never forget how these icons used the twilight of their lives to champion monumental humanitarian causes, establish institutions for independent artistic expression, and raise their voices for the preservation of our natural world. By transforming their global fame into a tool for systemic change, they ensured that their impact would be measured not merely by box office receipts or golden statuettes, but by the tangible good they brought to a fracturing world. Their lives became a testament to the idea that true stardom is not about occupying a pedestal, but about lifting up humanity. As we look back at the incredible journey we have taken through the lives of these cinema and television pioneers, a deep sense of gratitude and nostalgia inevitably washes over us. The golden decades of Hollywood may now belong entirely to the past, and many of the beloved faces that once brought us so much comfort and excitement have gracefully exited the stage, but the timeless magic they created remains completely untouched by time. Every time a classic film is projected, a vintage television episode, or a familiar theme song plays, these legendary stars come alive once more, bridging the gap between generations and reminding us of a time when storytelling possessed a grand, sweeping majesty. Seeing these iconic faces again is not merely a nostalgic exercise. For millions of devoted fans around the world, it feels like revisiting a cherished chapter of life itself. It brings back memories of family gatherings around the television screen, the thrilling escape of a dark theatre on a Saturday afternoon, and the profound ways these performers shaped our own values, dreams, and understanding of the human condition. Their elegance, their rugged individualist spirit, their sharp wit, and their emotional vulnerability remain woven into the very fabric of our cultural DNA. They were the architects of an era that will never be replicated, a time of genuine glamour and monumental talent that continues to shine as a guiding light for the future of entertainment. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the archives of cinema history. If this deeply moving exploration of Hollywood's most resilient and unforgettable icons brought back special memories, touched your heart, or renewed your appreciation for the timeless art of storytelling, please subscribe to Golden Star Memories. Together, we will continue to honor, preserve, and celebrate the magnificent legacies of the forgotten idols and the timeless stars who gave us their spirits, their stories, and their unforgettable presence, ensuring that their brilliant lights will continue to burn brightly in our hearts for generations to come. the historical distribution and commercial structure of 20th century cinema operations relied on the production of stylized public identities that masked significant structural demands, age-related transition anxieties, and institutional displacement for standard industry participants. Throughout the classic film and early broadcast eras, prominent international figures such as Clint Eastwood Jr., Jane Seymour Fonda, William December Williams Jr., John Rhys Davies, Jean Marilyn Simmons, Robert Fuller, Vanessa Lynn Williams, Bruce Dern, Jane Kennedy, Walter Charles Dance, Elaine Ivor May, Mariam Darboe, Roman Polanski, Margaret Elizabeth Tilley, Michael Kirk Douglas, Judy Catherine Claire Parfit, Jill Arlene Saint, John Richard Schneider, Maria de Lourdes Villiers Farrow, Petula Clark, Bernard Coppell, Eleanor Jean Parker, Anita Gillette, Charles Robert Redford Jr., Susanna York, Robert John Odenkirk, Vanessa Redgrave, Susan Kerr Weld, Rosemary Harris, Nancy Kovac, Jero Enart Krabbe, Hector Elizondo, Jill Clayburgh, Verushka von Lendorf, Susan Wooldridge, Tom Skerritt, Alan Stewart Konigsberg, Tom Baker, Claire Bloom, Leslie Claire Margaret Carone, Joe Don Baker, Britt Marie Eklund, Margaret Natalie Smith, Diane Carroll, Geraldine James, Howie Michael Mandel, Dustin Lee Hoffman, Caroline Bliss, Armin Mueller-Stahl, Tom Atkins, Barbara Bain, Jean Rosemary Shrimpton, Rhonda Fleming, Ursula Andress, Mitzi Gaynor, Thomas Stephen Wopat, Joel Grey, Thomas Edward Courtenay, Angeline Dickinson, Art Malik, and Brigitte Jane Fonda functioned within strict corporate constraints designed to maximize box office value. Studio publicity architectures applied non-disclosure protocols and coordinated media strategies to sanitize significant medical emergencies, legal conflicts, and sudden occupational departures, isolating high-profile talent from direct public accountability. In response to the post-mid-century fragmentation of traditional studio networks and the changing requirements of entertainment markets, these figures adapted via divergent individual paradigms, ranging from total residential reclusion and private creative redirection in the literary and fine arts, to the deliberate application of global visibility toward international human rights, climate, and structural environmental advocacy movements.